and how the snow tastes of tin at any station. I assume that means like subway station or tube station, as you guys call it. Is that a correct assumption? It's kind of where my head went. Then in the next
It could
stanza,
be. It could be the open platform at Nuneaton for all I know.
okay, fair. Um, and for all I don't know, because I have no idea what the open platform at Dunedin is. So
Depressing is what it is.
yeah,
Very
okay,
depressing.
noted. Put that on my list of things to visit when I go over there.
Hey, everybody. Watcher. Yes, I have been watching reruns of Luther. Welcome to another episode of the Audiophiles. My name's John. His name's Andy.
Mhm.
How high, real high? Because I'm just so fly. A young, lovable, huggable type of guy. And everything is to the back with a little slack. Because inside out, it's wiggida, wiggida, wiggida whack. All will become clear later. But first, we've got some music to listen to. Um, can anyone smell toast? So,
Sure.
because it's a Friday, we are listening to a track that's been suggested by one of our wonderful viewers.
Mhm.
Uh, we had a look at it. I kind of know this song, so young Andy will be the one going off and bearing himself on the altar sacrifice of music gods. So the track is Ultravox. I Can't Stay Long.
Yeah.
And it was suggested by Danielle Drossos TT3QQ. I believe that is a warranty number. Um, Danielle suggested Ultravox. Are you familiar with Ultravox in any way, shape, or form,
Uh,
Andy?
we've said this before. Well, I know I have, and I think you have on a few bands in the past. Aware of their existence, and that is the beginning and ending of my knowledge thereof. So only know that a band existed called Ultravox. I don't even know if they're still around. But I, for some reason, in my mind, equate them with the post-punk movement. I could be totally wrong, but I feel like when I've heard of them, it's been in conversations about that brand of music. So other than that, I'm completely flying blind.
Okay, well, that changes today. Um,
Excellent.
so yeah, go off and have a listen. I Can't Stay Long, Ultravox. Come back and offer up your thoughts.
I will do just that. Okay, pretty interesting start there. It starts and it has this kind of like pulsating and brooding nature to it that's on its own short-lived because then there's comes in this high guitar motif that will eventually cut out and then rejoin as you just heard here in the what sounds like the verse proper. But you have that kind of higher registered guitar motif like weaving in and out. And then as it drops, I think you get these like synthy chime like notes that kind of cascade over the song, like, I don't know, digital, rainwater. And then here we have the vocalist now joining the fray. All of that, I say to kind of illustrate how this is a pretty interesting start. It starts one way, and then you start getting these other elements that come in and kind of round off the sort of harsher edges of the music in that very beginning portion, that kind of brooding rhythmic nature with these softer edge chime like synth sounds and that guitar. Yeah, interesting stuff. I'd like to see where it goes from here. So let's press on.
The turning of the tides, pulling away the night like a sheet from over me.
I like that line.
In summertime, I dissolve to a beach, and everywhere seems to be just a flicker on the silent screen. Because I can't stay long.
Kind of lifts.
Let the sky roll on, just a flicker, and the crowd moves on. In winter, overcoats closing, and the snow tastes of tin on the steps of any station. I like to glide in the long green light of a July afternoon. Sliding down a big conversation because
Another one of those. Every time he does the "because I," it kind of like lifts up a bit and opens. I like that. I like that. Yeah, there is that introductory line. Something about feeling the turning of the tides, pulling the night away like a sheet would be pulled away is clever stuff. I mean, the moon and the tides, and it shifts from night to morning, and in the way a sheet is pulled from you, which ironically is what happens in the morning when the night has sort of expired, right? You wake up and you pull the sheets from yourself. So yeah, that was a clever bit. And then he goes on to talk about winter and the taste of snow, and then the long green, I don't know, afternoons of July. So he shifts to this summer kind of aesthetic through his lyrics. So it's interesting. He's that really clever opening line, and then these, kind of metaphors to seasons or times of the year that are very juxtaposed to one another. You have winter, and then you have July, the heart of summer. So yeah, interesting stuff. And again, this "because I" kind of, the song opens when he hits that line, and that's really quite nice. Let's take this back a little bit. So that's the winter part.
I like to glide in the long green light of a July afternoon.
Yeah.
Sliding down a big conversation because I can't stay long. When the moment comes, just a glance, and the glance is gone.
Nice. This echoey effect.
Watch closely.
Okay, bass drops out.
And the girl with the map synchronize with the track. On that golden way.
Nice.
Through all the walls. I let the scenery dissolve into some other life. Because I can't stay long. Let the sky roll on. Just a glance, and the glance is gone. I can't stay long. When
nice. Oh. The fade out. Hmm. See, I loved what they were doing there. The guitar, this science fiction-y phasing laser gun like guitar work, and those really solid drum rolls to kind of like punctuate and emphasize bits of that lead. Sounded great, and I wanted that to continue on for a bit, and certainly to continue on at an increased volume. They sort of we've talked about this in a couple recent songs recently, where the end, the fade out is over top of perhaps the most you know cumulative part of the song, where all of it sort of comes to fruition. That is when they choose to implement the fade out, and I was just getting into relishing the sounds and the musical decisions made during that part. When the one musical decision I didn't like reared its head, which was to, I guess, more of a production decision. Really, the music sounded good. It's just this idea of implementing a fade out there. I could have gone without, or at the very least, I could have gone with another 20 seconds or more of that lead before then implementing a fade out to really let it wash over me. Yeah. Aside from that relatively minor, qualm, this is a really cool, interesting song. Yeah, I loved the echoey, phasey, very 80s like guitar sound in this track, and the synth helped add that as well, that kind of 80s aesthetic and feel to it. I also thought the lyrics were just evocative enough. Like I said, excellent use of simile and metaphor in some of these stanzas of lyrics of his. And this feeling of like enjoying bits of life, but understanding that there's going to be a time perhaps to check out. Now, I don't know if that means death or if it just means to move on from that period or moment. But it is interesting, and I'd like to understand more about perhaps the meaning of this, if that's something John has come across in his research for the song, or perhaps if any of y'all, the listeners, can provide some context. I think it's a really interesting subject matter, and he talks about it in just a roundabout enough of a way that it's got some fluidity in its interpretation or meaning to any one given listener. So I really like that a lot. The song had a lot of rhythm to it, but it was very rudimentary. A lot of just like chugging bass and very simple drum beat, but it was very movement oriented. It progressed well. It provided this great canvas over top of which the synth bits and the guitar bits could really do their thing and shine. But yeah, I love the part where they cut the bass out, because it added this like this sort of distinction between that part and the rest of the song, and it only added more sort of oomph to the song when the bass sort of re-entered and it culminated into the next bit, and his and eyes and how it opened up. It was very good, excellent decision making there too, to give the song some lift at exactly the moment where it probably needed it. At each moment those and eyes were deployed throughout the song. Yeah, this is cool. I've heard of Ultravox, but not familiar with their work. So, on top of learning a little bit more about the song, both from a musical standpoint and a lyrical standpoint, I can learn more about this band. I'm sure John has done his homework. So let's get back to him and learn some more.
Metal Gear Solid, he's back. So you've had a listen to Ultravox, I Can't Stay Long.
Yeah.
Suggested by Danielle Drossos. What are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, it was a good listen. I enjoyed this. I'm glad I could check Ultravox off my list of bands that I've heard of but hadn't yet listened to. So this one kicks off, and it's like got this pulsating and like brooding fashion to the way things start, with this clipped bass and guitar, I think, type work that combine to craft this almost industrial feel to the soundscape. But that's kind of short-lived, because then comes in this sort of higher registered guitar motif that weaves its way in and out of that pulsating bit. It's accompanied by a pretty rudimentary, straightforward drum beat, and then enters this sort of quavering, synthy, chime-like sound that kind of cascades over the music like digital raindrops. And this all acts to kind of, I think, smooth out the edges of that pulsating beginning sound. So now we've got this quite an interesting hodgepodge of sounds that are going on. And I think at one point the guitar cuts out for a little bit, and then it re-enters when the vocalist joins for the first verse. And the vocals are fairly easy to discern. They're almost that spoken wordy kind of delivery, but not completely. Just kind of opens the song that way. And the lyrics of the first verse wash over me. And they kind of resonated with me. He sings, "I can feel the turning of the tides pulling away the night like a sheet from over me." And that's a great line with this deft use of simile, where it's like, so there's this interesting correlative connection, right, between this night being pulled away and sheets being removed from you as you lie in bed, given that night turns into morning, and in the morning we wake up and we remove the sheets from ourselves. So everything all works really well together in this sort of lyrical, literary standpoint. I think it's pretty clever. So hats off to that opening line, which did capture my attention. He then delivers the next lines before the song shifts slightly into like the third stanza of lyrics, in which his delivery opens up just a little bit, and his tone becomes slightly more emphatic when he opens with "because I," which is a reoccurring thing, as I'll come to find out throughout the song. And this bit is punctuated at the end by these two hard hits of the cymbals before shifting back into the delivery from the first two stanzas, this more subdued delivery, though not completely spoken word, just shades of it. And he touches on the aesthetics of winter and how the snow tastes of tin at any station. I assume that means like subway station or tube station, as you guys call it. Is that a correct assumption? It's kind of where my head went. Then in the next,
it could be the open platform at Nuneaton, for all I know.
Okay, fair. And for all I don't know, because I have no idea what the open platform at Dunedin is. So
Depressing is what it is. Very depressing.
Noted. Put that on my list of things to visit when I go over there. So yeah, then he shifts into this it's really funny because he's talking about winter and snow in this stanza, and then he shifts to talking about kind of he alludes to summer and the long green light of a July afternoon, and something about sliding down a vain or vague conversation. Again, things take a tonal shift. Though this time it's even more noticeable when he delivers the lines "because I." And after that bit, we get more of this interesting but short-lived sonic offerings from the guitar that blasts with the slightest bit of echo as it moves from note to note, which is interesting because I think at certain points in the song, if I'm not mistaken, if my memory serves me correctly after just one listen, I think he also uses echo from time to time on his voice, or echo is used on his voice, but it also seems to be used on the guitar as well at points, which is an interesting sort of dynamic between vocals and guitar and sort of the style or production choices that they employ. Then the bass cuts out and we get some light chugging, more like scratching on the guitar strings as the lyrics begin again. But you can feel the emptiness where the bass once was. And as he wraps up this stanza of lyrics, the chugging ramps up a bit and it heralds in the return of the bass, which is easily my favorite Tolkien novel. And so wait, I think that's the king, but bass is king in my book. So it has this lovely kind of like the absence creates this void that then makes its return, I don't know, more noticeable or more effective. And that's just a clever use of, you know, creating a void to then, you know, repopulate it and garnering my attention in doing so. Um, so yeah, we get treated to another "Because I," which is followed by the narrator professing that he can't stay long, which I thought was interesting. At this point, it gets a little bit more, I don't know, nihilistic about, like, and before it's like this, he's like talking about memories or what he enjoys doing or what it's like at certain points of the year or certain times. But then there's this sort of like I can't stay vibe, which is an interesting turn of events. Um, and another flourish on the cymbals, and we're off to enjoy some really, like, even more than the last guitar motif, very science fiction-y themed guitar work here. Um, it's phases and echoes over top of these like rudimentary but rolling rhythms that keep the song moving. The guitar screeches and blasts like a laser gun as the drums roll. And the song starts to fade out at its most bombastic, like cumulative, like at the culmination of the song, the apex is when it starts to fade out. And we've talked about this recently. If you're gonna do that, like, make that part last a little bit longer so I can truly enjoy the meatiest,
Yeah.
tenderest bit of the meal before it starts fading. Because very soon you start to realize that this awesome sounding bit is becoming farther and farther away from you until it wraps up. So if I did have to complain, and also awesome drum rolls during this part, even though they're fading out, you can hear these really nice drum rolls that are kind of punctuating the stuff on the guitar. My only qualm with the song is this choice of how they wrapped it up, almost this hurried fashion where they could have savored that a bit longer if you know, my personal book. But yeah, aside from that minor qualm, I enjoyed the song a lot. I find myself wondering what it's about exactly, particularly from a lyrical standpoint. It almost has this this sort of bittersweet goodbye note vibe to it by the end of it, which I thought was interesting because he talks about leaving. So I'm wondering what it's about. I'm wondering a little bit more about the band, when it came out, because it gave me strong 80s vibes, with how much they leaned into that synth and some of the guitar sounds that were toyed around with, and probably at this point were still kind of new and fresh. So yeah, tell me more about this song that was offered up by Danielle.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, I think from my point of view, it's a decent song. I enjoyed it. Um, I'm familiar with the later iteration of Ultravox. I was probably just a bit too young for this version. This sort of music I wouldn't have tolerated at the time. Nah, get out of it. It's
Mhm.
too soft and too wussy and you know, it's post or post punk for me. And new wave was a bit hit or miss, which is weird because there's certain songs within that time period and a bit after this that are like quite some synthy or new wavy bass that I absolutely adore. And
Mhm.
we'll get onto that in a second. So sometimes they just hit, but it wasn't really my kind of music for a while. I appreciate it more now than I would have done as a teenager anyway. So yeah, I enjoyed this and it was interesting. I have heard it before, but a while back, a long time ago. Um, so history of the band, quite some interesting little snippets here. So they were formed in London in 1974 as Tiger Lily, and then they became Ultravox with an exclamation mark, and then they became Ultravox without an exclamation
A
mark.
more subdued Ultravox.
Yes. They were known initially as glam rock, and then post punk, and then synth pop, and then new wave, and just straight pop. So the first iteration of the band, known as Tiger Lily, was formed by singer-songwriter Dennis Lee, with Chris Allen, who was calling himself at the time Chris St. John. It could be St. John. If you're really posh, you pronounce St. John as St. John in this country. It's a weird affectation, but there you go. I suggest he was probably just Chris St. John. Stevie Shears, Warren Cann, and Billy Currie. So the group released one single under the Tiger Lily moniker. It was a cover of Fats Waller's Ain't Misbehaving. And although it didn't chart, it was used in a soft porno film. I don't know the title of that film. Perhaps the title of the film is Ain't Misbehaving. I don't know. That's all the information I got. The band then went through a series of name changes because they weren't happy to Tony Livy. And they dabbled with The Zips, Fire of London, London Soundtrack, and The Damned. And they used the last name, The Damned, for a few weeks before discovering that a band called The Damned already had taken it. So that was a bit of a blow.
Well, damn.
In terms of like their live performance, on the strength of it, they were signed to Island Records in 1976. And while finalizing their debut album, they settled on the title Ultravox! Exclamation mark. And the exclamation mark is a nod or a reference to the krautrock band Neu. At the same time, Dennis Lee chose John Fox as his stage name, and Chris St. John, became Chris Cross. Hence the lyrics at the start, Chris Cross going to make you jump. And I just always like to think of that. And wearing your clothes back to front. Yeah. Bless them little scamps. So, like many other bands,
They're probably like 50 some years old now. This little scamp.
like many other bands that formed Britain's punk and new wave movements, Ultravox! Exclamation mark, drew their inspiration from like Roxy Music, New York Dolls, Bowie, and Kraftwerk. And their debut album was co-produced by Steve Lillywhite and Brian Eno. Sales were disappointing. Common theme. And the album didn't bother the UK charts. So during this time, Fox declared, and Fox is with two X's, by the way, Foxx.
Of course.
He declared that he intended to live without emotions, a sentiment which he wrote into the debut album track, I Want to Be a Machine. I'd just like to sort of follow on from that. So around this time, you had certain bands, roundish this time, bands that had that sort of, the future was, electronic and Android. So you had like this, you had Newman, Kraftwerk obviously were doing their thing. So you had this stylized vocals, which is not spoken word, but it is almost monotone,
Flat.
like an android singing. And that became quite prevalent, to be fair. And because I grew up hearing that all around, I didn't bat an eyelid, But for someone else, you would think this is very strange.
Yeah.
And it is. It is.
You know what it reminds me of, John? It reminds me of how, like, when how you have accurately pointed out, and I was too deep in the forest for the trees, that a lot of 90s American rock had that kind of like growl to the delivery that is just so ripped off and overused. That grunge affectation it was in a lot of American 90s stuff is akin, or that movement similar to this kind of androidian type delivery that you're talking about. It was of the time.
And I bet there's others as well in periods of time that we probably don't spot, but they're there,
Yeah, that's probably that screamy hair metal stuff that's like, like you get with the Guns N' Roses and shit, like that was everywhere for a while.
Mate, that was awful. Anyway, Ultravox returned in 1977 with the punkier, apparently, album Ha Ha Ha. Sales of the album and its lead single, Rock, oh, fuck me, were again poor and chart 3 in status. So rock is capital R, capital O, little c, little k, capital W, little r, little o, little k. Rock had punk lyric chorus with the words, come on, let's tangle in the dark, fuck like a dog, bite like a shark. Despite this, it actually got airplay on BBC Radio 1. Still didn't get any sales. Although Ha 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 was dominated by guitars and Billy Curry's electric violin, the final track, Hiroshima Mon Amour, was a prototypical synth pop song. And it was one of the first tracks by a British band to feature a drum machine. Apparently it was a Roland Rhythm 77 with preset patterns. It signaled a new direction for Ultravox, i.e. new wave, and it remains a critic and fan favourite from that initial period. This track you listen to is the second track from their third album, 1978's Systems of Romance. So it's quite early, and it was recorded with producer Connie Plank, great name. And he has worked with Kraftwerk, I think Neu, Cluster, Harmonia, and Holger Tutsai as well. So, and it was recorded in Planck Studio in Germany. So the lineup of this album was John Fox vocals, Dennis to his friends, Chris Cross, Gonna Make You Jump on bass, synthesizer and vocals, Billy Currie on keyboards and violin, Robin Simon, guitar vocals, and Warren Cowan, drums, rhythm machine vocals. So they had actually dropped the exclamation mark a couple of months before this. Musically, the album was very markedly different from the previous work, bringing synthesizers to the front of the sound. The other guy, Stevie Shears, had already left the band. His guitar playing was seen as limiting. That's a bugger, isn't it? Now, frustrated by too many opinions of how their sound should sound, this was quite a period of change for a lot of bands, and this bringing the technology was coming in very fast, and bands like OMD in particular were really pushing the boundaries, and I know Human League and other stuff as well. So Fox was really frustrated by all these different opinions of how they should sound. So he made up his mind during the initial rehearsals for this album that he was going to leave, but he had to stay and see out the band's commitments to the record label for the album and everything. Reviews in the British music press were mixed. Some was like, what's this shite? But others were supporting this new sound. Sounds magazine gave the album 4 out of 5 ratings, and they said, whatever anyone says, Ultravox, brackets, Sons, exclamation mark, have always been that important step ahead of fashion. Personally, I don't think it's their best album, but the definitely alienating production and tricky use of electronics make it an important enough development in the career of the band that always aims for the unusual. AllMusic said, with 1978's System of Romance, Ultravox left punk behind and single-handedly blueprinted the entire new romantic movement to come. Debatable. Gone were the brittleness of Ha Ha Ha, replaced by a rich lushness of sound that would define the forthcoming genre. Then they go on to equate different songs to paintings and styles. So Quiet Man is a Lowry painting brought to life. The chorus of slow motion is a swaying field painted by Renoir. I Can't Stay Long is a Degas ballet, while Maximum Acceleration is as lavish in sound as Botticelli was with paint and big asses. The rhythms still remain dangerous, however, and Robin Smith's guitar gives that set a tough edge, but it's the swirling, swooping synths and keyboards that predominate within. So this album, Systems of Romance, has been cited as a major influence on the synth pop music scene of the late 70s and early 80s. And Gary Newman himself, often called the godfather of electro pop, described the record as his biggest single musical inspiration. So despite initial splurge of sales, 20,000 copies, the album, you guessed it, failed to chart. And Island Records dropped the band at the end of 1978. We'll come back to that story in a second. I should now go through the lyrics of Tut Song. I can feel the turning of the tide, pulling away the night like a sheet from over me. In summertime, I dissolve to a beach, and everywhere seems to be just a flicker on the silent screen. Because I can't stay long. Let the sky roll on, just a flicker, and the crowd moves on. In winter, overcoats close in, and the snow tastes of tin on the steps of any station. I'd like to glide in the long green light of a July afternoon, sliding down a vague conversation. Because I can't stay long. When the moment comes, just a glance, and the glance is gone. And then we have that brief instrumental with that guitar. Watch closely as a man with a hat and a girl with a map synchronize with the track, and they go away. I need to drift through all the walls and let the scenery dissolve into some other life, because I can't stay long. Let the sky roll on, just a glance, and the glance is gone. I can't stay long. When the right time comes, I'll dissolve. I'm not sure. I didn't actually read up on the meaning of this song, but I think it's him kind of picturing himself going into like celluloid scenarios, like a character in a film or whatever, and he's dissolving away. It's also becoming a fantasy story, and just again, not becoming human, but becoming part of a TV or film scenario. And
Okay.
you get these things like the dissolves and the flickering and them synchronizing to the track. And there's all these film stroke TV sort of nods,
Yeah, the
isn't there? So
screen, the allusion to a screen
yeah,
and stuff like that. Yeah.
that's what I think, something like that. But yeah, I like the lyrics. I particularly like the winter overcoats close in and the snow tastes of tin on the steps of any station. You just the big coats, the grandad
Yeah.
coats that were very fashionable then as well. It just instantly pictures me there, because I was wearing them. Perhaps 5 years later after this, but yeah. So yeah, I think they are good lyrics,
Yeah.
better than standard stuff at that time. To be honest with you, it was either so plain and dreadful or so opaque that you haven't got a fucking clue the guy's writing about the inside of his belly button or whatever and what could be found within.
Yeah.
There's
This
you
kind
have
of
those
like
two.
is in between. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
It's enough that it's you can't single out what exactly it's about. So you can sort of that is great because it leaves a listener to kind of like inject themselves into what the words mean and mold it kind of cater
Yeah,
them
yeah.
to their own experience and so forth.
But it's quite visual as well in its
Yeah.
lyrics, which is great
Yeah.
because you can project your own sort of thoughts. So Ultravox actually embarked after being dropped by Iron Records. They embarked on their self-financed tour of the US in early '79, and to their amazement, received enthusiastic responses by the American audience and several sold-out venues. But after their final gig near San Francisco in March '79, Fox said, "I'm off to pursue a solo career." He gave the remaining members the band name and he returned to London. Simon remained in the US and joined other bands. The Futans, a punk band from New York. He then later returned to England and teamed up with Howard DeVito to replace guitarist John McGeal from the band Magazine.
Mm.
We've spoken about that before.
Mhm.
The remaining members made their way back to Britain during the winter of discontent. Ireland actually dropped the 3 Ultravox albums from their catalogue and released them as a compilation of highlights of those albums in 1980 in an album called 3 into 1. So things didn't look good.
Mm.
With the band seemingly over, um, Ultravox were then revitalized by mid-year. He joined the band as a vocalist, guitarist, and keyboardist. He'd already had some minor success with a couple of other bands, Glenn Matlock's Rich Kids, and he'd been even playing with Thin Lizzy. He'd replaced Gary Moore as guitarist on it. Yeah, so Ura and Billy Curry had met while collaborating on Visage, which is a studio-based group, really, that was fronted by new romantic icon and nightclub impresario, Steve Strange. Wonderful character. He's actually one of the guys on the beach in Bowie's Ashes to Ashes video. You see
Oh.
them processing on the beach. He's one of the people there. And apparently Bowie stole his look. Anyway. So yeah, they had some success, a couple of albums and a few hit singles. There was one called Night Train, which I liked. It was really wonderful, Fade to Grey. And that there is a Visage 12-inch, and it's terrible. I get my records from very many different places, but this one was something special. I was actually at like a household tip, where you go to take your rubbish.
Uh,
And they had a stack of records there, and the guy says, "Oh, help yourself, they're free." I think I got a Wings album and something else, and then this one here, and it's tatty as fuck. And I thought, why not? Because I quite like the cover. It's rubbish. But anyway, so Ultravox, they signed a new record deal with Christmas Records. New album, Vienna, heralded major change in direction and will become their most successful to date. Again, it's produced by Connie Plank, he of Krautrock fame. So Vienna was released in 1980. The album produced the band's first top 40 hits. They've got charting success now.
how about it?
A single called Sleepwalk, which reached number 29. And while the album itself initially peaked at number 14, the band released another single which didn't do anything, but their third single was the title track, Vienna, which is a classic. It peaked at number 2, and it was only held off the top spot initially by John Lennon's Woman. This is after John Lennon had just been assassinated.
Mhm.
And then Joe Dolce's Shut Up Your Face, which also stopped Imagine from being number 1 as well.
Oh.
And The British public should hold their head in shame because of that. And he has never been. And I don't know if you ever heard "Shut Up Your Face" by Joe Dolce. It's a comedy, like spoof song. What's the matter, you? Hey, gotta know. It's awful. But yes, it was number one for about 6 or 8 weeks or something stupid. Anyway, on the strength of that single, the album then re-entered the charts and got to number 3 in early '81. And the fourth single peaked at number 8 as well. The album itself became a platinum selling album. And that's where the success came in. There's much more. Vienna's a great song and it is quite interesting, but they became a much more sort of synthy pop mainstream sound. So the band continued with another 4 albums, all hitting the top 10 in the UK charts, and each one of them got gold status for sales. In 1984, Midge co-wrote and produced the Band Aid charity single, Do They Know It's Christmas, which then kicked off everything. The band actually took a 2-year break, but it was only sort of aside. They did perform at Live Aid in 1985. Now, you imagine Live Aid was a bit of a hell of a sort of, coming together everyone and trying to rush it. Now, the last time they toured in '84, they'd had 22 keyboards on stage, and the sound checks alone took 5 hours. They couldn't do this for Live Aid, so they chose songs which they could perform with the least amount of equipment, with no rehearsal or sound check at all, which was hilarious. And then later in '95, Midge Ure, who'd already started his solo career, had a solo #1 hit in the UK with If I Was. And the accompanying album from that, The Gift, reached number 2. So after the tour supporting their 1986 album called Ultravox, the band decided to split in '87. Cross retired from music to become a psychotherapist. Can later moved to LA to work in the movie business. Curie went solo, and then he reformed Ultravox in the '90s without any of the original members. And it didn't really do much. And then in the noughties in 2008, they digitally remastered and then re-released 2 of their earlier albums. And Can, Cross, Curry, and Midge Ure reformed Ultravox again for a major tour. And they said they weren't going to do anything new. And then, sure enough, new album in 2012. But they then performed their last gig in November 2013, supporting Simple Minds. And then in 2017, Curie announced on his website that he decided that his time as a member of Ultravox had come to an end after 43 years. And in effect, the band was over. And sadly, bassist Chris Cross, he died on 25th of March this year, aged 71. So yeah, that's Ultravox in a sort of nutshell. But yeah, so most people will know Ultravox from that Vienna period onwards, when they had their success and chart success, obviously. And this is an interesting point at which they were probably at the forefront of this emerging new wave synth type sound, which is interesting, and that's what makes it a very interesting song and choice.
Yeah. No, and excellent choice by Danielle, because I got to learn a bit about Ultravox, a bit about Ultravox, while also hearing a really cool song that helps me understand where they sort of fit as far as like timetable is concerned and stuff. I was thinking firmly in the '80s, early '80s, but even before that then. So more on the pioneer side of this kind of sound, and the melding of kind of post-punk and new wave, weird juncture that those two subgenres had as they were sort of in their infancy.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, just really briefly, that punk was such a shock to the system, in terms of the music establishment. You had this prog rocky glam thing, and artists were becoming sort of detached. And then these kids come along, to a certain extent anyway, DIY, all that sort of stuff, and it fractured everything. And you had the oncoming technology. So you had post-punk almost immediately after punk, and that fractured itself into sounding this way and this way, and incorporating, you've heard it recently, incorporating like ska and reggae, synth pop as well, and all these other different things. And these fractures, New Romantics was like the chart thing, but there was all different sorts of music. So it was really interesting. And I think that period of time, that 77 to 82, is just such an exciting time that laid foundations for all different sorts of music for the next couple of decades. Yeah. So yeah, and they were a big part of it, you know, they really were.
Yeah.
So hats off to them. Okay, well, I shall wrap this up and say thanks for listening to this, Andy. Thank you, Danielle, for suggesting this. It's a really interesting and something a bit different. And yeah, I really enjoyed doing the research on this as well. There's a few things I didn't know, so which I found really enjoyable. Folks out there, please tell us what you think. If you like this, do hit the like button. It does help with Evil Core and all the algorithms. Please drop some comments. Tell us what you think about this song, this band, this period, this Septidile, anything you want. We'd love to hear from you, and we really enjoy reading all your comments. If you haven't already subscribed, you just missed out on the free tea towels, but hurry up and subscribe, and who knows what will happen to you. Who knows? Probably nothing, but it can't harm, can it? So yeah, we appreciate everybody who does support the channel. That being said, thanks again so much for watching. We'll see all of you in the next episode of the Audiophiles.
We'll see you later, guys.